Welcome everyone into another episode of Pod Like a Champion, the blueandgold.com recruiting podcast. It's Wednesday, April 21st, 2021. I'm Patrick Engel, joined by our recruiting insider, Mike Singer. We will get to some recruiting talk later in this episode, but there's only one place we can start this one. It's been a tough week for us and for our Blue and Gold Illustrated colleagues. Lou Somogyi, our colleague, friend, the face of BGI for nearly 40 years, best coworker you could ask for, one of the best men you'll meet, passed away Saturday at the age of 58. And Mike, I know I speak for you as well when I say this, but it took a couple of days just to be able to even try to work again in the shock and the suddenness and the sadness of this all. I mean, and even now there's still a part where it just doesn't really feel real that Lou, our colleague, but first and foremost, the person that he was isn't with us anymore. And for all of you listeners and readers who, whether you listen to him for just a few months or read his work since the original days at BGI, you'll know him as unique in his encyclopedic knowledge of all things Notre Dame and the pride and grace with which he approached his work. But I want to talk about him as a person first and second and third. And all of that is secondary, because that to me is what really set him apart is one of the kindest, purest hearted people that you'll ever meet.
To like a fault, like nice to a fault. Like, just I feel like the only times I'd ever disagree with him is when it came to him taking a compliment. I'd be like, Lou, like you did a great job on this, man. Like you really need to just to say you're welcome or thanks. But I echo what you said. His knowledge of Notre Dame football, his writing acumen, how hard he worked. That's like 10th, 11th, 12th on the list of how great Lou was. And I've listened to Tim Priester, Brian Driscoll, all these other guys, Todd Burlage, we've had staff meetings, we're all talking about Lou, hear what the WSBT guys have to say about Lou, all of the remarks on Twitter, what everyone has said about Lou, and it's all consistent, when I think about myself, it's like, well, if I passed tomorrow, there'd be a lot of mixed reviews, about me. Like, oh, that guy was a jerk on the message board, or, hey, he missed a couple recruiting predictions here and there, and but he loved covering recruiting, But with Lou, it's like everything's the same. The dude was just consistent in who he was, and who he was just the most selfless, kind-hearted person. Like he's the kind of guy who would give you the shirt off his back if he could, but he already gave it to someone else, because he's just that kind of kind person. It's just it's brutal. It's brutal. Just even logging on for us to record this. The last podcast we recorded was the Irish Huddle. So up on the screen it says Irish Huddle and Lou Somogyi, and I just kind of stared at that and I was like, I just can't believe that he's gone. It's stunning, devastating. It was I'll never forget that day in this past weekend for just how incredibly hard it was, and something that I hope I never have to experience, another weekend like that. But, life happens, so I'm sure I will. But it's incredibly tragic. And just please keep Lou Somogyi's family in your thoughts and prayers.
It really was a rough weekend, just trying to process and for a while failing to process the tragedy of it and why it happened to Lou of all people. But to go back on something you said earlier, like Lou really was like almost allergic to compliments, and it's just kind of one of the quirks, honestly, about him that made him who he was, and it really went back to that selflessness. Like if you ever tried to compliment him, which I mean, how couldn't you in everything that he did? He was just so not interested in it, and he would reply with like, you don't want to get complacent or something like that, as if like after 40 years of doing this, and 40 years of, if you just listen to the people who read him for that long, and the people on social media or our message board who talked about the impact he had and how they think he's one of the best who ever covered Notre Dame. Like, there wasn't much for him to really to continue to get better on. He was an institution, but it's like he still had this like desire to do that, and it just speaks to the pride he took in his work. And even though he didn't like, getting compliments, I don't know if there's anyone who enjoyed giving them out as much as he did. And it was all authentic, like
Right.
none of it forced. And to me, in the 14 months that I knew him and got to work with him, I think that goes back to what I'll appreciate most about him as a person. And that's just his ability to see the absolute best in everybody, whether it was a coworker or someone on the message board or on Twitter, or anyone. Like the ability to see the best in them, and as if he was preconditioned to kind of lift you up. Like, Mike, I know he thought really highly of you, and I know he went out of his way to compliment the both of us for work that we did. However, some undeserved, I feel like it might have
Yeah.
been for me at times. Certainly, when you think about compared to him, of course, but it was. I don't know that I've ever had anyone in the industry, and maybe few outside of it, believe in me as much as he did. And I'm never going to forget that as long as I stay in this. And hopefully that's a while.
Right.
And, and just again, the ways he went out of his way to pick me up or mention, hey, that was a nice job you did on that story, or nice job just handling this random thing that was kind of thrown on your plate last minute, or something like that. And I mean, especially as I look back on, the first, my time here, really, it's been what, 13 months, all of it in the middle of a pandemic, uh, on a new beat, all of that challenges that it presents. I could certainly go back through that and find tons of examples where, like, oh yeah, I could have, should have done this differently. I've wanted to do this more than I have by now, or oh yeah, I screwed that thing up. But no, Lou didn't care about any of that, because I think he genuinely enjoyed working with us as he would have enjoyed working with every single person he did, and that just speaks to who he was.
Yeah. Yeah. The couple things. The one thing I loved about Lou was his sense of humor. Um, Sometimes it was tough to even understand it unless we were on the phone or something, or on a podcast. Like, you know, this is really funny. So last week we had our last episode of the Irish Huddle with Lou. The week before, would that have been like the April 8th? We should have done one, but we were just too slammed with recruiting. Um, so I said, "Hey Lou, and I emailed him, hey, let's just go ahead and not do one this week. I had just so much going on." And he said, "Okay, I'll try to do better next time." And I was like, "What are you talking about, Lou?" And he said, "Sorry, I'll try to do better on the joke." Like and then anytime he had an error in a story, the only person Lou would ever get upset with was himself. At least in the 2 years I worked with him, um, he was, anytime I'd call him up, "Hey Lou, like you did this wrong," like, or as the photo of the article, you had our ad placed in there, not our, any kind of error. Dang nabbit, Mike. He would always do that. And then, and if anyone ever said anything on the message board or corrected him, he would make fun of himself. But yeah, just his sense of humor was hysterical to me. Patrick, when you joined the Blue and Gold staff, we were in a tough place. We had gone several months with only two full-time writers, being me and Lou, and the word he used to describe you was godsend a lot. So he really did speak highly of you, and I don't know if I said this to your face or not, Patrick, but I've always kind of considered you, and I know I've at least said that you and Lou are very similar. You guys were on a pod for a while together, and I was like, man, this feels like I got two Lou's on here. So I've always kind of called you Lou 2.0. I don't know if you're going to have the personality and patience for Lou, but as a writer, you've got some potential, man.
Oh Lord, I I will not come close to matching Lou's patience with anything, whether it's wild takes on the board or something not working or just the fact that he stayed up late every night after a
Never
football game
complained
putting a
about
magazine
anything.
together and loved it. Yeah.
Never.
No, I don't think I'll have that patience. I'm you're talking and listening to somebody who gets really mad when an internet page takes 5 seconds to load, or or just little things like that. So Lou's patience, among many other things about him, was unmatched. But in this, the sense of humor was like so well executed
Always.
self-deprecation.
Yes.
So, I mean, for those of you who listen to Lou and I in the podcasts in the fall or going back, however long, Lou has done these podcasts, you get to pick up the Louisms. And whether that's related to football, like in the Big 12, defense is a rumor, or the first 4 yards of the running game belong to the running back or the offensive line, the rest belong to the running back. But one of the ones that he used to kind of poke fun at himself was my expertise with technology stops at the on-off button. and and yes, he was not the most well versed in computers or phones and whatnot. I think he had an original iPhone 4 until just last year, actually. Again, more patient with that than a lot of other people would be who are more technology literate, including myself. Yeah, you could give him slow internet or whatever, and it wouldn't bother him. But yeah, one of the ways he would poke fun at himself was so to give you guys a little inside baseball of how our publishing admin works. You when you go into our back end to put together a story and publish it, it takes you to once you hit publish, takes you to a dashboard of all of our stories. So you have to actually go in find the thing you just published, go hit a button to open it as the actual on-site web browser URL link for the story itself.
Because
And then you had to paste
it
that.
wouldn't because it wouldn't show up on the front
link.
page right away, right? So you had to go into the dashboard to find it because
Yes,
as soon as you
exactly.
hit publish,
Exactly.
it wouldn't show up on the front page. So yeah, I just wanted to make that clear. Yeah.
Yes, Rivals admin inside baseball fun here for you guys. But yes, so sometimes, and this is easy to do. Trust me, if you tried to do this enough, you would make this mistake because I have to. Sometimes when you go in to hit the Control C on the URL, you do it on the publishing admin page and not the URL of the actual story itself. And then when you go post it on the message board, sometimes the publishing admin page URL would end up there instead of the story link. Or we put in related links at the top of our stories. Sometimes the cut and paste wouldn't trigger for whatever. And so the last related link you'd paste would be the one that you accidentally had Control C and would end up in the message board. So yeah, sometimes that would happen, and someone would mention, "Hey Lou, I think this is the wrong link," and he would be like, "Ah, dang it," and then say, "Oh man, I had such a good streak of this going. It was this many days since I did it. I swear, guys, I'm going to be better at this." And it's like, Lou, it's no big deal. It's just a simple fix. It's just 5 minutes in. Like, no problem, as I've done for this. And honestly, I think it had been a little while since then. But yeah, just one of the ways that he would just kind of poke fun at himself. And like you said, he's the only person that he would get mad at or make fun of, when in reality he should be the only person he shouldn't have gotten mad at or make fun of, just because of how good a person he was.
Yeah, he'd always say, "Thank you for carrying my ass, Mike." Sorry for the language, but he'd always say that, like, "Oh, Mike, you're always carrying my ass." I'm like, Lou, like, there is, of course, we still have the Blue and Gold Illustrated magazine, monthly in the off season, weekly during the football season, and actually, guys, bluegoldonline.com. Go there in a couple of weeks. We'll also be tweeting about this. We're going to have Lou on the front page of our magazine. And we had a meeting about this today. It was going to be 8 pages, now it might be 12 pages. It's probably going to be like 20 pages dedicated to Lou Somogyi. So if you want to get if you're going to get one print magazine, it's got to be this one. Like it's if you like Lou Somogyi, please, you're going to want to pick this up. So anyways, Lou would write, I mean, Patrick, you would know this as well, like 60% of the entire magazine on top of everything he did to our website. And he had the audacity to say that I carried his ass. And I'm like, dude, there's one magazine a year that I write as much as Lou, and it's the recruiting magazine. I'm the recruiting guy. Like, of course I'm going to write a ton for that. And just how hard he worked, and never, ever, ever once complained about anything. Never. I mean, the only thing he would complain about is himself. I'm like, oh man, but we're just gonna miss him so much. You know, eh, he's irreplaceable. He's Blue and Gold Illustrated. He's blueandgold.com. We're renaming our message board in honor of Lou. There's just nothing that Patrick, me, anyone could say that could do Lou justice. All right, well, this is the Lou Somogyi Like a Champion episode of Pod Like a Champion. Anything else you want to add on Lou before we actually talk recruiting?
I mean, I could go on for hours and hours, but I think at some point some people want to listen to recruiting a little bit here, which I mean, Lou had his own way of contributing to that, of course. If you want to know, all right, who's the best player in Notre Dame history from Rhode Island? Bam, he'd tell you. Who's the best running back Notre Dame's ever recruited out of Texas? Bam, tell you from memory. Like that's to. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least touch on a little bit of that. Yes, of course, like his from memory recall of literally anything you could possibly want to know about Notre Dame was unmatched. Like it's just kind of cool to like say you knew and worked with someone who was either better at something or knew something or did something or just was like something more so than anyone on the planet.
Yeah.
And that was Lou with what he knew and could tell you about Notre Dame football. I would put it up against anyone on the planet. I don't think that's a reach. I don't think it's hyperbole. I think it's 100% true.
It's not even debatable. Who else is there? I mean, nobody.
Certainly not me or you. But anyway, we do talk enough about recruiting and write enough about recruiting to at least think like we know what we're talking about. So why don't we dive into that? I guess the biggest news of the last couple of days is at wide receiver, where on Tuesday, one of Notre Dame's top targets, four-star receiver Tyler Morris, out of LaGrange Park, Nazareth in the Chicago area. He committed to Michigan, Rivals 100 player, at or very close to at the top of Notre Dame's receiver board. So, Mike, I'm just going to kind of open it up to you of kind of how this ultimately came together and where Notre Dame goes from here.
This has been a Michigan, Notre Dame, Florida battle for the past few months. He was the only official that he had locked in was to Notre Dame in June. I believe it was the 18th. Steve Angeli, who was Morris's 7-on-7 quarterback for a little bit this offseason. He's going to be visiting that same weekend. And then, I mean, Morris was considered a Michigan lean for a while. It was, a week and a half ago, I put in a FutureCast pick for him to go to Notre Dame, Tyler Morris. And the feeling was that he is a Notre Dame type kid. And it's really just, I mean, there was a stretch of last year where Notre Dame wasn't really recruiting Morris that hard. And it slowly kind of picked up in the fall. And then I would say once the season ended, into January of this year, it really picked up. Tommy Rees, Stella Alexander really doing a good job in this recruitment. So I felt like he's a Notre Dame type kid. He loves Notre Dame. He's been to campus a few times. He was actually Notre Dame's second offer in the 2022 class. It was back in May of 2019. He had visited like 3 or 4 times or something. So I just felt like with this official visit, Notre Dame pushing hard, he, top of the board guy, he would end up at Notre Dame. Well, he committed to Michigan, obviously, on April 20th. Now, why that is, I'm just going to kind of take an educated speculation here and say that his injury that he suffered this past weekend had to have played a role. I'm not going to get into specifics of his injury because I don't know what's out there, and I don't want to be the guy who's, in his a grown man talking about a high schooler's injury. It's not my place to say. But he did suffer a bad injury, so I've kind of wondered, like, did he speed up his process, to kind of lock something in, because he did have an injury, and there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with serious injury. So that's just kind of educated speculation on my part. Um, Patrick, I know where you stand on the well, we didn't want him anyway crowd, when a kid, doesn't commit to, insert school names here, in that fan base. So, yes, Tyler Morris was definitely a guy that the Notre Dame staff wanted, but I do wonder, like, how Notre Dame felt about, his injury. Did his commitment to Michigan have anything to do with, other schools potentially? Like, I don't know. That's pure speculation there. So yes, he was a guy that Notre Dame really wanted, but that injury that he suffered this past weekend, I think definitely changed things up. Now, would Notre Dame still have recruited him? Will they still recruit him? I don't know. But he that injury, I definitely feel like played a role in something here.
Yeah, I mean, first, I hope it's not something that prevents him from being able to see the field in college or play again, because I've seen him uh, in person. I think he's absolutely worthy of the top 100 status he has, and ultimately, like, look, I don't know what Notre Dame thought of, or what they did or thought after learning of a potential serious injury here. We probably won't ever know. But that all said, like, he was a huge target that we've talked about on here. Like,
It's a loss. Yeah.
yeah, it's a miss, it's a loss. I don't think you can get around that. And I this is the, sort of, we didn't want him anyway spin that I think has been uh, out there a little bit, where it's, oh, he's just like a more of a slot guy. That's not really going to move the needle, close the gap, whatever. I don't think that's true at all, based on one, just the fact that he's a slot receiver, or two, that he himself could do it. Again, this is a top 100 player who's explosive in his own right, fast, slippery, really good after the catch. All of those things can help you on offense, and certainly would help Notre Dame's offense. Now, of course, I hope that he's able to do all of those again at the level that we all expected him to be able to do it in college, when we'd seen him play. But I don't think that him, and also let me say this: like, if he had committed to Notre Dame despite the injury, I think everybody would be thrilled. Like, I don't even think that's up for debate. Like, so I don't think you can really have it both ways there. But I don't get the idea around, like, oh, he wouldn't have helped or closed the gap, like, because he's in the slot. Like, no, that's not necessarily true at all. Like, when I spoke to him a couple weeks ago, I went out and saw him at a Tom Lenning's photo shoot. I asked him, what kind of role offenses or he's college coaches see him playing in their offense. And when I asked him about Florida in particular, he mentioned Kadarius Toney, the slot receiver, do everything offensive weapon, I guess is what you'd best call him. And well, Kadarius Toney was the leading receiver, led the team in yards and catches on a highly explosive Florida passing offense, and he's a potential first round pick next week. Like, I don't know, how does that not help you? If you're a first round pick or even a top 50 or 2 round pick, like, almost all the time you're going to be a highly impactful player. And now I don't want to straight up compare the two, but he would have been in that same role in whatever, most likely whatever offense he would have chosen to go to, and I would imagine it's the case in Michigan. And I think he has a lot of the traits that would allow him to do a lot of impactful things in that role.
Yeah,
So
slot receivers are important. That's your point here. Yeah, yes.
Exactly.
I mean, it's
Exactly.
stupid. I mean, what do Notre Dame fans say? We want speed. Like, Notre Dame's recruiting too many 6'3" guys. Well, I bet if Notre Dame were recruiting a bunch of 5'11" guys, and then Notre Dame fans, oh, we want 6'3" guys. We need more Chase Claypools. Like, sorry, receiver recruiting. I'm sorry cutting you off, Patrick, but receiver recruiting is one of these things that is kind of frustrated me a little bit. And I'm in terms of, like, the Notre Dame fan, like, and I'm trying to be, Lou Somogyi patient here, but sometimes I fail. Oftentimes I fail because I'm just like, I mean, let's just talk about the recruiting. Once they get to Notre Dame, like Jordan Johnson, like that's a whole different discussion. Like, does Lorenzo Styles play this year? Like, once they get to Notre Dame, that's a different discussion. But like the recruiting, I mean, Notre Dame signed Lorenzo Styles, who Notre Dame beat out Ohio State, Michigan, Deion Colzie, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, etc. Jaden Thomas, Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, all these schools in 2020 recruiting class. George Johnson, 5-star, Xavier Watts, who's really good. It's like on one hand, I got a Notre Dame fan saying, Jordan Johnson, Xavier Watts are so good they need to be playing. But how do you then say that receiver recruiting stinks? Like, which one is it? Like, are these guys really good, or does receiver recruiting stink? In the 2022 class, which we're going to kind of transition to here with what's next, at the position for recruiting, Amorion Walker is a boomer bust guy. I've had one connected college football source, I'll call him, say that he's got Randy Moss potential. Like, not that he's going to be Randy Moss, but that's the kind of player, maybe that's the player comp that he could be if he pans out. Just kind of that long, speedy guy that is very good going up in the air and making acrobatic catches. So Amorion Walker, the Notre Dame receiver commit so far in the 2022 class, certainly a high ceiling. And then you look at the board, Patrick. I mean, there's some big time players. So, I mean, I feel like if you're going to look at 2-year recruiting in the 2020 and 2021 cycles and look at star power, I mean, receiver is one of the better.
Yeah, I think so, and it's why I'm not like, I don't think it's completely catastrophic of the state of it. But and to go back to the point about Morris here, I believe this was Pete Sampson who did this research a couple weeks ago, where if you look at, you say it's still a position where there's a bit of a noticeable gap, which you saw in the Rose Bowl, and you can see in the recruiting rankings
Sure.
between Notre Dame and say Alabama or Ohio State and whatnot. And I think it's there more so compared to other positions. Although I think if you did the same thing at corner, you'd see it. But that's getting too far into that discussion. Anyway, I believe it was Pete who did this, where if you looked at like take the last 3 classes, I believe it was, of receivers from Notre Dame and then Ohio State, it was like Ohio State had 8 of the 10 highest rated. I think Alabama was pretty much the exact same thing. And you want to try to close that a little bit. Morris being a top 100 player who both you and I think is worthy of that would have helped you do that. But at the same time, like you said, in a vacuum, receiver, it's not like they haven't gotten any potential high impact receivers or any top 50 receivers or what have you. And in overall, like this is still very good receiver classes.
Yeah.
And I get like right now, okay, 2022, okay, Morris, giant target, didn't work out. Amorion Walker, intriguing, but the boomer bust potential, like you mentioned, just as easily as you could boom, you could bust. Like
Yep.
it's kind of hard to go either way. Like which one is more likely at this point here? And that's not to say you shouldn't have taken or anything, but just kind of highlights like what that take means. But all of that said, I think there's still a path, as you'll I'm sure touch on here in a minute, for the 2022 Notre Dame receiver class to still finish as a strong unit.
I guess my bigger theme here, what I'm trying to say is that, like, what hill do you want to die on for crit? I mean, like, is it receiver recruiting? Like, how about the quarterback position? I mean, Notre Dame, as great as Ian Book was, I mean, that is the most important position on the field. I mean, Notre Dame hasn't had a first round quarterback selection under Brian Kelly. Like, so if you're going to point to something that, like, of course, Notre Dame needs to recruit and coach better. Any position. I mean, tight end, Notre Dame needs. I mean, offense line, like everywhere. I mean, so that whole thing is like, well, this is not closing. I mean, if it were super easy to do it, I mean, Notre Dame would just do it. I mean, it's not like Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State are not providing resistance. I mean, like they're recruiting these guys too. So it's not really that easy of a thing. But yeah, I mean, if we're gonna die on a hill of what Notre Dame needs to do better, I mean, what about like recruit stud quarterbacks? And I mean that's what I would say. I mean a freak at quarterback can, I mean, elevate really good talent to make them even better. But also, if you have talent that's not as good, make them look even better. Make an okay player look really darn good, and a really darn good player look elite. So, speaking of elite, Patrick, I think a good segue to talking about C.J. Williams, who is, I think you can make a really good argument that he is a top of the board target. So, just a rundown of some receiver names. And a good bit of these guys are also going to be officially visiting in June, including C.J. Williams. At the end of this month. Kind of fitting that tonight in Lucky Charms, I will also kind of have a receiver recruiting update, including what CJ Williams is looking at for June. Of course, he will be visiting, like I said, at the end of this June, which is going to be huge official visitor month. 50 offers. If you're on YouTube, you see that right now. 50 offers in total. Number 27 overall player in the country. Number 3 receiver. Number 2 California player in California. I've been saying for months that Notre Dame's kind of been running 3rd or 4th, maybe 5th in the recruitment, kind of hanging around. Well, it's really kind of swung more toward Notre Dame being in that 1 or maybe in that 1 to 3 range rather than 3 to 5. Like, they might be in the top spot right now. But if Notre Dame is the leader right now, how much does it matter if he's taking 5 visits in June? Like that's when it really comes. With a lot of these kids, unless they're deciding in April or May, where you're at now doesn't really matter. It's like, the first quarter of a basketball game. Well, hey, Notre Dame's up 18-10 right now. We got the lead. Like, you would, if you turned the TV off at that point, you'd be dumb. Like, it's similar. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's similar in recruiting.
It kind of is, especially with Notre Dame's defense last year.
Nice interjection there, buddy. So yeah, I would say that again, hearing good things about where Notre Dame's at with this borderline 5-star receiver, number 27 player in the country, and I think for a player comp, I don't know how much you've been able to see of CJ Patrick, but
admittedly none. I'll be honest, I've not much watched any of him.
He kind of reminds me of some Jordan Johnson. I think maybe a little less twitchy, but an overall better receiver. Like, Johnson kind of just has some twitchiness in his game that I've really liked and seeing. So I think Williams might be a little bit lesser of an athlete than Jordan Johnson, but he is a higher level all-around receiver. Like, I don't think either C.J. Williams or Jordan Johnson are absolute burners. So Notre Dame fans, I don't know what you want to take of this, but I think both guys are like elite level recruit possession receivers. Like, I know Notre Dame fans don't want to hear that. It's like, oh, they probably think of like Ben Skoranek at the top of their head. But like is C.J. Williams a number 1 guy in college? Like, I don't know, but to me, he is an extremely safe recruit, like the safest you can get. Like, he is not going to bust. I mean, Notre Dame has signed some, high level, highly ranked receivers who have not panned out before. So to me, just how well he catches it, how smart he is, how he can separate. C.J. Williams looks really good on tape. But I'm kind of curious your thoughts on the Jordan Johnson comparisons of, those two guys being like darn good possession receivers. Like, but they're not, I don't think either of those guys are the, Calvin Johnson. Well, I don't know why he was the first receiver name that popped in my head, but like, some of these Alabama receivers, in the past few years, Julio Jones, like that kind of 5-star caliber receiver. But they're darn good possession guys, like top of the board, like as a possession receiver, as good as they can be. That's them.
I agree with a lot of that. Obviously, he's the top of the board target, not the only target. So who else are you keeping an eye on, Mike? Especially those who are coming in for a visit later this month.
Let's wrap this up. Talking about several other prospects here. Tobias Merriweather from Washington, number 160 overall player in the country, number 18 receiver, number 2 player in Washington. I feel like Notre Dame is top two, top three school for him. I think Stanford's up there, Oregon, but I think Notre Dame is a really good shot to pull him out of the West Coast. Both of these guys, Meriwether, Williams, from the West Coast. Meriwether's actually the guy who visited back in 2019. I believe it was November as well. That was a huge month. Little did Notre Dame know how important November 2019 was going to be for 2022 prospects, because that was kind of when they brought in a lot of these guys they liked but hadn't offered a bunch of them yet. It ended up getting some of them and have a good shot to get some more. Andre Green, to my knowledge, has not set up his Notre Dame official visit yet for June, but I feel like there's a good chance of that happening. 52 total offers. Notre Dame's on his short list, though, unofficial short list, I should say. 6'3", 180-pounder. This dude is an absolute freak. 4-star from Richmond. Taylor Groves, I had a story up on him on Wednesday morning. Make sure to go to blueandgold.com to check that out. Previous Michigan commit. Another one of these big receivers, 6'3", 185 pounds. Could also be a really good defensive back at the next level. I should have more details about a call that he had with Notre Dame today. Nicholas Anderson, listed as a low 3-star on Rivals, but ESPN has him as a top 100 player. That's quite the disparity in difference of rankings, but I feel like he's someone who's going to jump up in the Rivals rankings. 6'4", 183 pounds, another big receiver, and one that Notre Dame is very high on. Really good conversations between Nicholas Anderson and Dale Alexander. Definitely keep an eye on him. Interesting, I've seen a lot of Notre Dame fans favor Xavier Bradshaw over Tyler Morris, and I'm like, but wait, I thought like star rankings were the most important things in offer lists, but like Xavier Bradshaw, his next biggest offer after Notre Dame is West Virginia, Arizona State, but people love Xavier Bradshaw. I think he's a really good player too, and a slot guy, kind of in that same mold as Tyler Morris. I think Xavier Bradshaw would be a really nice pickup for Notre Dame. Addison Copeland, who was a former Rutgers commit, he decommitted from Rutgers after Notre Dame offered like 30 minutes afterwards. I think Notre Dame could scoop him up, if the Irish decide to push, but it's not, it's definitely not a foregone conclusion at this point that they will. Pittsburgh, South Carolina, some of the other schools involved with Copeland, listed at 6'3", 190 pounds, another big dude. And the last guy we'll mention here, Joseph Griffin, currently a Boston College commit. Someone I spoke to yesterday about Griffin in the Northeast told me that he's an NFL guy. Like, he's going to be playing on Sundays. And I was like, whoa, that's heavy praise right now. A lot of these guys we just mentioned, C.J. Williams, Tobias Merriweather, Bradshaw, Griffin, I want to say even Copeland, are playing states that did not have fall football in 2020. So Griffin is someone who just through a couple games this spring has looked incredible in workouts and 7-on-7 clips. Notre Dame's been really impressed by him. So this is a 6'4", 195-pound 3-star recruit from Springfield, Massachusetts Central High. They also have a really good 2023 quarterback on their team. Notre Dame has not offered yet, but I wonder, hey, Notre Dame could get both of those guys. I think I believe his last name's Watkins. He's a really good player. But Griffin's committed to Boston College right now. Feel like if the Irish push for Griffin, that they would have a good chance of flipping him from the Eagles.
So that's receiver rundown for 2022. Any other positions or developments that you want to let the people know about elsewhere in the 22 cycle here before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, just recruiting in the 2022 class is extremely busy right now. Visits being shuffled around. Just a quick sentence or two on each position. Steve Angeli, solid Notre Dame quarterback commit. He'll be on campus that June 18th weekend. Running back recruiting. Notre Dame's going to have at least 3 running backs officially visit in June. Could be 4. There's a young man from Alabama, Quinshaw Judkins, who could end up visiting in June. Emeka Megwa from Texas. He could be on campus in June as well. We just touched on receiver. Tight end recruiting. Eli Raridan is actually visiting this weekend. The young man from Iowa. Holden Stays from Georgia. Both of those guys will likely officially visit in June, and feel like Notre Dame is in great position with both of those guys. Offensive line is going to be very busy in June. Tons of official visitors. Defensive line Boy, is that an interesting position right now to keep an eye on. They will have multiple official visitors in June. Linebacker is extremely exciting and interesting to follow. It looks like they have like 3 guys for 2 spots. Does Notre Dame take 5 linebackers in total? Sebastian Cheeks, Nuafe Jr., Tui Halamaka, and Jalen Sneed, some of the key names to watch at linebacker. Then defensive back is wide open right now. You got Jaden Mickey, 4-star corner, committed. He will officially visit Notre Dame at the end of June. But then you've got Ohio State corner commit Jair Brown, Kamari Rogers, the number 6 player, the number 6 corner from Mississippi. Terrence Brooks from Texas. There's just so many defensive backs. Jaden Bellamy, teammate of Steve Engel. A ton of DB names. Xavier Nwankpa, safety. Jake Pope, safety, as big-time recruits, all officially visiting Notre Dame in June. So it's going to be hectic in the month of June. And Notre Dame released some camp dates, so they're going to have a few, 5 or 6 or something, recruit camps. I believe some coaches clinics and stuff like that will probably be able to happen too. So busy summer, and make sure to lock in at blueandgold.com.
Well, as those official visits continue to get set and continue to get shuffled around as they normally do, Mike will be reporting on that as he has been the last few weeks. And before we go one more time, I want to make sure that, yes, you guys can order that our next issue of Blue and Gold Illustrated, commemorative issue for our colleague Lou Somogyi. You can go to bluegoldonline.com to find that. Highly recommend. And of course, follow us on Twitter at Patrick Engel _ENGEL. That's me. Follow Mike at Rivals _Singer. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. If you want to get subscribe to our channel for all of our videos, hit that notification button, that little bell right there. You'll get a ping every time we put out a new one. If you'd be so kind to hit that thumbs up button. And for our podcast listeners, please leave us a review, leave us a rating. We'll love you forever. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We will talk to you again soon. Until then, take care. And Lou, we miss you.